Thylacines were carnivorous marsupials in the family Thylacinidae. As they are now unfortunately extinct, this will be the first completely extinct group of animals I will be covering on my channel. There is a document in the description with the copyright information for the images used and research papers that I found useful, so check that out if you are interested. Thylacines were marsupials in the order Dasyuromorphia. I have already done a video on numbats, another marsupial in this order, so have a look at that if you want a more in-depth breakdown of marsupials and Dasyuromorphia. I will briefly recap that information, but I go into more detail in the numbat video. The subclass Marsupialia is defined by their parental strategy. Among mammals, there are three overarching strategies used. The monotremes, containing the platypus and echidnas, are the only mammals to lay eggs. I do have a video covering that entire order, so have a look at that if you want to learn more about them. Eutheria is the placental mammals. The young are birthed at a late stage of development, and so are generally much more independent from birth. Eutherians is the largest group of mammals, as it contains all mammals that are not monotremes or marsupials. That just leaves the marsupials. In contrast to the placental mammals, they give birth to their young at a very early stage in their development. They typically have a gestation period between 12 to 33 days, although in a few species this can be a few days shorter or longer. This is extremely fast when compared to placental mammals. Some rodents might have comparable gestation periods, but the majority of eutherians remain pregnant for at least several months, and this can be up to 22 months in the most extreme example, which is the gestation period of the African bush elephant. The trade-off for this very fast birth is that the young will emerge as little more developed than a fetus. These newly born young have two noticeable features. They are very good at crawling, and their poorly developed mouth has a hole large enough to suckle on their mother's teat. As soon as they are born, they will crawl over their mother and into her pouch. Most marsupials have some sort of pouch, and the young will spend all of its time in there for the first several months after being born. Even once they are weaned, they will often remain in the pouch for up to a year, and during that time will return to it for safety and to sleep. When the newborns first enter the pouch, they will find a teat and start to suckle on it. The teat will swell so that the newborn is unable to detach itself until it is old enough to have a well enough developed mouth to let go. Marsupials have several different orders. These are broadly divided into South American and Australian marsupials. Since marsupials originated in South America, the earliest lineages are from that continent. First are the shrew opossums in Porca tuberculata, and then these are followed by the true opossums in Didelphimorphia. The next lineage is Microbiotheria. This is also South American, but only has one living species, the Monito del Monte. The Monito del Monte is an interesting marsupial, as it is more closely related to all of the Australian marsupials than it is to any of the other South American ones. All other marsupials are Australian, and they start with perhaps the most well-known group of them, Diprotodontia. This contains iconic Australian animals like kangaroos, wallabies, koalas, wombats, and many others. Next is the two species of marsupial mole in the family Notorictidae. The last clade has Pyromelamorphia with the bandicoots and bilbies, and then finally the order we are looking at today with the carnivorous marsupials in Dasyuromorphia. The order Dasyuromorphia are known as the carnivorous marsupials, although the name is slightly misleading. While all of the species included are carnivores, there are also carnivorous or omnivorous marsupials in other orders. Species in all three of the South American orders are carnivorous, as is the Australian marsupial moles. Additionally, bandicoots are omnivorous, eating insects, snails, lizards, and mice, in addition to plants and fungi. And that is before you get to the extinct animals, which includes, for example, giant omnivorous kangaroos. As always, common names are not the best at describing the animals included. People who have not spent time in Australia will probably be unfamiliar with most of the animals in Dasyuromorphia. There are three families, and the most basal is Thylacinidae, or the Thylacines. These are the topic of this video, so we will return to them in a minute. Next is Myrmecobiidae. This only contains one species, the numbat, which is an extremely unique marsupial, known for only eating termites. As I mentioned earlier, I do have a separate video on them if you are interested. The last family is a large one, with 72 different species. Its most well-known members are the Tasmanian devil and the quolls, but it also includes dunnarts, endochinus, phascogales, and many other species. The members of Dasyuromorphia often look similar to placental mammals due to convergent evolution. The names given to many of them by the early European settlers reflect this similarity. The thylacine is also sometimes called the Tasmanian wolf, or quolls were native cats or foxes, for example. Most of the carnivorous marsupials alive today range in size from a domestic cat to a house mouse. Many are on the smaller end of the scale and do often look similar to rodents like rats, mice, and jerboas. People who are familiar with the family Thylacinidae probably only know about the most recent species. However, the family also has many known prehistoric species in it. There are currently 9 genera and 14 species of Thylacinidae. Thylacinids last shared a common ancestor with other Dasyuromorphs about 38 million years ago. For context, that makes Thylacines as closely related to the other carnivorous marsupials as meerkats are to tigers. The oldest known Thylacinid is about 25 million years ago from the Oligocene epoch. This is the genus Badjcinus, a word that combines the Wanyi Aboriginal language for expert hunter with the Greek word for dog. It was much smaller than the modern Thylacine, only being about 2.4 kilograms or 5.2 pounds. In fact, most prehistoric thylacines were surprisingly small, at least compared to the more recent species. The peak of Thylacinid diversity occurred a little later during the Miocene. During this epoch, there were multiple genera of thylacines alive at the same time. The largest Thylacinid during this period was Maximucinus. It is only known from a single tooth, but that is enough to place it amongst the Thylacinids. Based on this tooth, it is estimated that the animal may have had a weight of about 18 kilograms or 40 pounds. Since it is only known from very scant fossil evidence, it is impossible to include Maximucinus in a phylogeny. The smallest known Thylacinid, Mutpuricinus, was about 1.1 kilograms, and so was about the size of a modern-day quoll. The place of Mutpuricinus in the phylogeny of Thylacinid evolution is still disputed, however. The phylogeny I used for this video actually places it outside of Thylacinidae in a sister clade, and so before Badjcinus. This does not seem to have been commonly accepted, as it is still often included when talking about prehistoric Thylacinids, so I have left it in the family here. We have already talked about Badjcinus, so it should come as no surprise that that is the next lineage. The clade after that contains 3 genera. Nimbacinus has 2 species. These were small, fox-like thylacinids, but they had unusually powerful jaws for their size. Most thylacinids had relatively weak jaws, and so likely hunted small prey. Nimbacinus, however, had jaws that would have been strong enough to take down prey larger than themselves. Muribbacinus only had a single species, and it was about the size of a fox terrier. Ngamalicinus also had a single species, and as with most thylacinids, it resembled a small dog. These last 2 genera are known from the Riversley World Heritage Area in northwestern Queensland, Australia. All 3 lived during the Miocene, being some of the diversity of that time that I mentioned earlier, although Ngamalicinus fossils are a little earlier than the other 2. Leaving that clade, we have Thylacinidae, another monotypic genus. It lived during the late Miocene and was found in the Alcuta Scientific Reserve. This means that it lived a little later than the previous genera I have mentioned, although it was still in the Miocene. Wabalacinus is the genus most closely related to the modern Thylacine. It lived during the early Miocene and is another one found at Riversley. Almost all of the genera I have just listed occurred at some point in the Miocene, really proving that that was the peak time for Thylacinid diversity. However, there are still a few more recent species to cover, although they are all in the same and therefore largest genus, Thylacinus. Thylacinus has 5 known species, most of which were much larger than the others in this family. The second smallest of them, Thylacinus eucalis, had an estimated weight of about 16 to 18 kilograms, placing it at a similar size to Maximucinus, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the largest of the Middle Miocene Thylacinids. The smallest was Thylacinus magnesi, which was also the earliest, and so conformed to the more prehistoric proportions, with an estimated weight of only about 7 to 9 kilograms or 15 to 19 pounds. The other species in this genus were much larger. The modern species, which I will cover more fully in a minute, could get up to 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. The remaining 2 species were the largest known Thylacinids, both getting up to around 55 kilograms or 121 pounds. Of these two, Thylacinus megariani lived a little earlier, around 8 million years ago, and had unusually large teeth. Thylacinus potens is estimated to have been about the size of a grey wolf, being about 5 feet long. Its teeth were not as adapted for shearing as the modern thylacine, and it was possible that they would crush bones like a modern hyena. If this was the case, then it was a recent adaptation, as older species would not have had the jaw strength or teeth to do this. Even in Thylacinus potens, its teeth were only partially adapted to do this. This means that it still likely hunted for prey, but may have opportunistically scavenged as well. This brings us back to the modern thylacine, usually just referred to as the thylacine, Thylacinus cynocephalus. It is sometimes also called the Tasmanian tiger or Tasmanian wolf. The thylacine survived well into the modern age, with its last known surviving member dying in captivity in 1936. This is recent enough that there are photos of it and even video, so we know quite a bit about it. The first thing you will probably learn about the thylacine is that it is an animal rumoured to still be alive despite its extinct status. Many people speculate that a population of them could still be living in the remote parts of Tasmania. From the last confirmed individual dying in 1936 until 1998, there were 203 unconfirmed sightings of them. More recently, between 2016 to 2019, there were 8 sightings. None of these have been proven, and extensive searches and camera trapping efforts have been undertaken with no results, but people still hope that the thylacine has managed to survive in the Australian wilderness somehow. In 2023, Brooke et al. Published a study disputing the 1936 date for extinction. They do believe that the species is now extinct, but claim that its population probably persisted into the 1980s and possibly even into the early 2000s. So it is possible, or even likely, that for much of the time it was presumed extinct, that some thylacines still survived, a conclusion that is supported by the large number of sightings in the second half of the 20th century. Despite giving that hope for its survival, I must now take it away, as it seems highly unlikely that thylacines are still alive today. The thylacine was the largest modern carnivorous marsupial. It was a slender, fox-like animal, with a head-to-body length of about 1 to 1.3 meters, or 3 to 4 feet. Its tail was about half of this length again, being 50 to 65 centimeters, or 20 to 26 inches long. Its tail was stiff, held at an angle to their body as the vertebrae in it were partially fused. Both sexes had a pouch. Females, of course, used it to rear their young. In males, however, it protected their reproductive organs, which is unique among modern marsupials. The pouch opened from the rear, which is also extremely uncommon. A backwards-facing pouch is seen in a few other marsupials, such as wombats, but in those cases it is an adaptation for digging, to prevent the pouch from being filled with soil. It is unknown why the thylacine shared this feature. Their jaws were incredibly unusual for a mammal. They could open them extremely wide, up to around 80 degrees. Despite this, their bite was not particularly strong. It was likely not powerful enough to even kill a sheep. It could also not run particularly fast, as it moved with an unusual awkward gait. It could hop, similar to a kangaroo, and could balance on its hind legs for brief periods, although it likely only did this to escape from danger. The thylacine hunted small mammals and birds, with water birds being the most reported prey, and wallabies being the most common mammalian prey, but they would eat anything small enough. There are even reports of thylacines eating lizards, frogs, and fish, so they were likely opportunistic hunters instead of specializing in a particular prey species. They were crepuscular or nocturnal like most marsupials, and so spent the day in small caves or hollow tree trunks. They constructed their nests or dens out of twigs, bark, and fern fronds. Thylacines had their peak breeding season in winter and spring, but it is thought that they could breed year-round, as evidenced by joeys being found in their mother's pouch at all times of the year. Thylacines could have up to 4 joeys per litter, although it was typically 2 to 3. The mother would carry them in her pouch for up to 3 months. The young had pouches too, but these only became visible at around 9 or 10 weeks old. Once they had left the pouch, the young would remain in their den while their mother hunted. As they got older, they would assist her with the hunt, until they were able to be completely independent. Thylacines were only successfully bred in captivity once, in Melbourne Zoo in 1899. Thylacines had a life expectancy of 5 to 7 years in the wild, although captive specimens could live to be 9 years old. Despite being known for living on Tasmania, at their peak, Thylacines could be found on the Australian mainland. They went extinct there well before European colonisation, being extirpated about 3,200 years ago, around the same time as the Tasmanian devil disappeared from the mainland. This date coincides with the introduction of the dingo to Australia. This has led researchers to suggest that they were simply outcompeted by the more advanced dingoes. Dingoes are pack hunters, omnivores, and able to take down larger prey than the solitary and strictly carnivorous thylacines, and so might have simply been better adapted. There are also some suggestions that dingoes, being larger and stronger, may have attacked thylacines directly. This left them with their known modern-day range on Tasmania. It is believed that a range of factors led to their extinction. The first is human persecution. Europeans saw them as similar to wolves, so started to attribute livestock deaths to thylacines. As I have already mentioned, this is almost certainly wrong. The thylacine was not built to take down prey as large as a sheep. It is possible that the thylacine was used as a convenient scapegoat to hide the mismanagement of sheep farms on Tasmania at this time. Whatever the reasons, a bounty was placed on them in the 1830s. Between 1888 and 1909 alone, over 2,000 bounties were claimed, and it is believed that many more thylacines were killed than bounties that were actually claimed. This prejudice was also spread with deliberate misinformation. A photo taken in 1921 showed a thylacine with a chicken in its mouth, cementing its reputation as a poultry thief. While thylacines could certainly have attacked chickens, this is not entirely accurate. For a start, as a shy animal and one that preferred to avoid humans, it is unlikely that a thylacine would have deliberately gone onto a human settlement. More importantly, however, is that the photo is entirely fabricated. I am showing it on screen, but there are two important factors that are difficult to tell. The first is that the photo is cleverly cropped to hide the fact that the thylacine was in captivity when it was taken. The other, and more baffling fact, is that experts believe that the thylacine in the photo is a dead specimen and was carefully posed for the camera. Carol Freeman gives an excellent analysis of this subject if you are interested in her article Is This Picture Worth 1,000 Words? To briefly summarise part of her argument, it would have been almost impossible to catch a thylacine in a pose like the one seen in the photo. A thylacine would not be standing still in the open like this, especially once it had caught its prey. The scene looks more staged and natural, especially given the technology available in the 1920s. Even camera traps today may not give an image as clear as this one. Analysing the image more closely, wasted flesh can be seen on the hindquarters and abdomen of the thylacine, and the chicken the thylacine is apparently holding is also likely a dead one attached to the dead thylacine's mouth. There are many other signs, but feel free to read the original article if you want a more detailed breakdown. But this fabricated photo confirms the biases and misinformation regarding the thylacines that was commonplace at that time. Returning to actual thylacines, there were other pressures on the remaining population, aside from human persecution. The introduction of dogs with the settlers would have had the same effect that the dingoes on the mainland did, adding yet another factor leading to their decline. However, thylacines may have been in trouble even before humans came to Tasmania. It is believed that they had extremely limited genetic diversity, and may have been in decline from about 70 to 120,000 years ago, well before humans arrived. The standards of the time said that a species could not be declared extinct until it had not been seen for 50 years. As a result, the thylacine was officially considered endangered until 1986 when it was formally declared extinct, with the last known individual being that one that died in captivity 50 years earlier. Given its recent extinction, a lot of research is currently going into whether it would be possible to clone the thylacine, essentially bringing it back from extinction. While regarded with skepticism by some scientists, various groups over the years have tried to sequence the thylacine's genome to clone it and ultimately return it to the wilds of Tasmania. These efforts started as early as 1999 by the Australian Museum in Sydney. While this had some success in extracting usable genetic material, the project was abandoned in 2005. Later in that same year, the project was taken up again by some universities and other interested parties. Much more recently, in 2022, the University of Melbourne partnered with an American biotechnology company for another attempt, and they have managed to completely sequence the genome of a juvenile thylacine. In 2023, a laboratory in Sweden managed to extract RNA from a thylacine, making it the first time that RNA has ever been successfully obtained from an extinct animal. In case you are not familiar with it, RNA is DNA's lesser-known cousin. It is essential for life, as it regulates many biological functions, from creating the template from which proteins are created, to a way for cells to communicate genetic information. It is a lot more complicated than that, but this video is not focused on the function of RNA, so let's return to talking about the animals. So, is de-extinction possible? Well, that is the million-dollar question, and the answer likely depends on who you ask. For an animal as recently extinct as the thylacine, then maybe. Many scientists are skeptical about whether it is actually possible, but people are certainly trying, so I guess we will have to wait and see. The thylacine has left its mark on many people. It is a favourite topic of cryptozoologists, given its many unconfirmed sightings. The 7th of September, the date the last captive thylacine died, has been commemorated in Australia as National Threatened Species Day ever since 1996. The thylacine is on the Tasmanian coat of arms and has often been used as a symbol of Tasmania. Thylacine-like animals are known from rock art in northern Australia. While little is known about the interaction of Aboriginal people with thylacines, a few stories were recorded by Europeans. One of these records suggested it was believed that an exposed thylacine carcass would result in bad weather, so they would cover it in a small shelter. A creation myth recorded from the Nuanoni people is that a thylacine pup saved a spirit boy from an attack by a giant kangaroo. To reward its bravery, the boy marked the thylacines back with ochre, giving them their distinctive stripes. Since these stories only come filtered through European accounts, it is unknown how accurate or widespread these beliefs were. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thylacines and their prehistoric relatives are a fascinating group of marsupials. While they are now unfortunately extinct, their strange appearance and frequent unconfirmed sightings have left them firmly in the public's consciousness, so much so that they may be one of the first animals brought back from extinction if such a thing becomes possible. Thank you for listening, and feel free to let me know what other groups of animals you would like to learn about in the comments.